All right, let's dive into a topic that is, frankly, a massive challenge for so many organizations, whether they realize it or not. We're talking about the huge gap between safety and security. They're really two sides of the same coin, protecting what matters, but so often they operate in completely separate worlds. Today, we're going to look at a framework designed to finally bring them together.
So let me just start with a question for you. Think about it. Are you only seeing half the risk in your organization? It's a pretty serious thought because if your safety folks and your security folks aren't on the same page, you almost certainly have a giant blind spot. And this slide really breaks down the core difference, right? On one side, you have safety. It's all about accidental harm. The main question is, what can go wrong? So you're dealing with hazards, system failures, things like that. But then you have security, which is focused on intentional harm. And it asks a totally different question. Who can make it go wrong? This world is all about threats, adversaries, and their intent. And here's where the trouble starts. Because they're asking different questions, using different language, these two worlds of risk they don't talk to each other. Not in a meaningful way, at least. And that creates these really dangerous gaps, where a safety issue could be exploited by a security threat, or the other way around. So, what do we do about it? Well, the solution is a unified approach. It's called an Integrated Security and Safety Risk Analysis Framework, or SSRA for short. The point here isn't to make one discipline more important than the other. It's about blending their strengths to get one single, complete picture of risk. So here's our game plan. We've talked about that blind spot. Now we're going to walk through the 4 big phases of this framework. Setting the stage, spotting the dangers, measuring the exposure, and then acting and adapting. And we'll finish up by looking at why this integrated approach is such a game changer.
Okay, let's get into phase 1, setting the stage. It's like building a house, right? You can't get a good result if you don't build a solid foundation first. It's just that simple. So this phase has 3 absolutely crucial steps. First off, you initiate and govern. That means you get clear authority. You define your scope, and you get the right people in the room from the very beginning. Second, and this is so important, you describe the operation as it's actually done. Not the neat version from the manual, but the real-world, messy version, with all the shortcuts people take. And finally, you build the asset register. You have to clearly define what it is you're trying to protect: your people, your data, your buildings, your key business functions. And this quote just nails it. It perfectly shows why that last step is a deal breaker. If you don't clearly define what matters, the whole thing just falls apart. You can't prioritize risks, you can't rank them, and you definitely can't justify spending money to fix them. This is what anchors the entire process.
Okay, let's move on to phase 2. Now that we know what we're protecting, we need to figure out what could actually harm it. It's time to spot the dangers. So this phase really has 2 parts that you do at the same time. Step 4 is your classic safety hazard ID. You're looking for all the non-malicious stuff, hazardous materials, faulty equipment, system glitches. Then, in step 5, you put on your security hat and do a threat assessment. This is where you identify the malicious actors and try to figure out how capable they are and how motivated they might be to cause harm. And that's the whole point, right? This framework doesn't dilute either side. It respects both. Safety keeps asking its fundamental question: what can go wrong? And then security comes in and adds its own critical layer on top. Okay, but who might make it go wrong? And what are they capable of? All right, so we've defined what matters, and we've identified the dangers. Now for phase 3, we have to measure our exposure. This is where we take all that data we've gathered and really start to connect the dots. This phase has 3 big analytical steps. In step 6, the criticality assessment, you go back to that asset register and you formally rank everything. This gets you away from that everything is important mindset and gives you a real priority list. Then, step 7 is the vulnerability assessment, where you measure how your current defenses actually perform. And finally, in step 8, the risk analysis, you bring it all together to build out complete scenarios.
And I have to say, that vulnerability step is so important because it's where the rubber really meets the road. This isn't about how great your controls look on a PowerPoint slide. It's about how they actually hold up in the real world, under real pressure, against actual threats.
So this is basically the magic formula at the heart of the whole framework. You take a safety hazard or a security threat, you combine it with the criticality of the thing being targeted, and then you factor in the vulnerability of your defenses. And what you get isn't just a safety risk or a security risk. No, you get a single, complete risk scenario that everyone in the organization can actually understand and do something about. And that brings us to the final phase, which is honestly the most important one. Phase 4, act and adapt. Because let's be real, an analysis is totally useless if it just sits on a shelf and doesn't lead to action and improvement. So there are 2 steps here. In step 9, we evaluate the risks and choose how to treat them. And this is where the integration is just beautiful. We use the best tools from both worlds. Safety's hierarchy of controls, which is all about trying to eliminate hazards completely, and security's layered defense and depth, which works on the assumption that any one defense can fail. Then, in step 10, we assure and monitor. We have to constantly watch our controls to fight against 2 really sneaky things. One is drift, where things just slowly change over time. The other is normalisation of deviance, which is when all those little unsafe workarounds slowly become the new normal. And, this quote is basically the mic drop for this whole framework. Risk management is not a one-and-done project. You're not finished when a report gets signed off. You're finished when your controls are still working months, even years later, despite all the pressures of a real-world operation trying to pull them apart. So after walking through all 10 steps, let's just sum it all up. What's the integrated advantage? I mean, why go to all this trouble? What makes this framework actually better than keeping things separate? Well, there are 4 huge benefits. First, you get the best of security. Its very specific way of analyzing threats and vulnerabilities isn't lost or watered down. Second, you get the best of safety because the whole process is grounded in the reality of how work actually gets done. Third, by combining strategies like the hierarchy of controls and defense in depth, you get solutions that are way more effective. And finally, because you build monitoring in from the start, you're protecting the organization against those slow, creeping failures we just talked about. So the big idea here is that by integrating safety and security, you're not just taping 2 lists together. You're creating a fundamentally smarter, more realistic understanding of your total risk, which really just leaves us with one final question for you to think about. Is your organization ready to see the whole picture?